Hello and welcome to Ireland Artcast, uncovering the creative industry. Here we talk about all things art, and each week I'll be joined by inspiring Max creatives to discuss creative careers as well as burning topics in the art world today to keep that creative mind of yours in action.
Welcome to another episode of Ireland Artcast, the Isle of Man Art Council's podcast for talking all things art. I'm Ali, your host, and throughout March we're celebrating women in the arts with a connection to the Isle of Man, and we have a very special guest with us today who works in the creative industry, Franki McDade. Franki is a former Ramsey Grammar School student who is now a lighting director and designer with over 15 years experience in the live music industry. Franki has worked with some incredible artists including Elbow, with Guy Garvey, Kay Tempest, Dizzy Rascal, James Arthur and Klaxons. So welcome, Franki.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm really good, thank you.
Your first visit back to the island in how long?
In a little while, actually. I was here for Christmas, so I had a little extended trip because I wasn't allowed to come back because of the pandemic. So I made
That
Christmas a
pesky
little
pandemic.
longer this time. But no, yeah, it's great to be back.
Excellent. Well, we're very pleased to have you. Can you tell us a bit about some other people that you've worked with?
Yeah, so I worked with Swedish folk duo First Aid Kit. I spent 5 years working with them, toured around the world. We did a whole campaign called the Rebel Hearts Tour. I'm actually about to start a campaign with Lewis Capaldi, so we're in the process of building that show. I'm the lighting director for that one, so I'm not a part of the design team, but I'm part of the kind of the day-to-day running of the show. That'll start from May, and I'll go with him through till the end of next year. So that'll be pretty full on. So doing Kay Tempest. I feel like it's going to be easier for me to work backwards on what I've done. So I've done that. Elbow is another long running gig, of course. And then before that, I've done. I used to work as a technician, so I've done stuff for Placebo and Rudimental. I used to work in a music venue in Lincolnshire when I was at university, so we would bring, that's where I got my start, so lots of bands coming through there, like Stereophonics, and we had the Radio Ones tour where it was 30 Seconds to Mars once, so it's been like a bouncing around a lot over the last few years. And then also working with some like new emerging artists like Awkward Moments and Cash and David. Some little bits and pieces.
Exciting.
Yeah.
That was going to lead me to my next question, which was, how did you find your calling in this career? What sparked it for you? Because obviously from the Isle of Man, you went to a very small, relatively small high school, and you went off to university, and just give us a bit of background into that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, when I was at school, I very much was a person that jumped from. If I could have done every art-based, music-based course within school, I would have done that over sciences and stuff. I was very much more that way inclined. I did. So I ended up having this little balance between having to choose between performance-based stuff and fine art. So I ended up choosing to do an undergraduate in drama. So I went to University of Lincoln to study that course, which was part practical, part theoretical. And in my second year, they built a theatre and music venue from an old converted engine shed.
Wow!
So really lucky to be in the early stages of that. And I started working in the music venue as a lighting technician and operating club nights and bits and pieces. But what we would also do is we would become the local crew for any shows that would come through. So that's where I met a lot of the people I still work with now, was through getting to know everybody. I met one of the lady that is the designer for Elbow, Kate Carter. I met her coming through the engine shed when she was working with Athlete. Right. And why have I forgotten his name? The Plan B, that was who I was thinking of. I could remember the album, The Defamation of Strickland Banks, but I couldn't remember the name of the artist. So met her through there, and we had a very a slow building friendship over the years, and finally we got to work. She brought me in to do Guy Garvey about 7 years ago when he did a solo album. Yeah. So that's how that relationship has run that full circle over the last 17 years-ish. So that was working in the music venue, and as I was spending more and more time of my kind of social time outside of uni in there, I realised I wanted to do more within the touring industry, and I was very interested in like the kind of performance art and the kind of set design side of things, because I was spending time in my degree building sets and doing a lot more of the kind of technical stuff with a creative pull on it. And that kind of, having that kind of theatrical background and set design ideas, pulling that into live music and getting that balance between the lighting and the kind of more rock music that was happening at the time. It was very much that, we're talking 2008, so it was all that kind of indie scene, or now known as indie sleaze, which is absolutely the nail on the head. It was brilliant.
Let's coin that phrase.
Yeah. It definitely describes that period of time beautifully. But the whole kind of mixing that whole thing up. And it's funny that later on I ended up working with Klaxons on that what ended up being their final tour, unless they do anything else again. We can be optimistic, but
let's hope they pick up the phone then. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really good. And they had a support band on that tour called Fennec Solar, who were amazing as well. That was a really, really lovely run. But moving into the music industry was to go. I didn't just jump straight into lighting design. I very much was aware of how difficult it can be to emerge into an industry. So I spent a lot of time working on the technical side of things, honing the kind of the practical side elements of it, working on festivals. So pretty much the day I finished university, I got a call from a company who had come through the music venue I was working with and asked me to go and work on like Glastonbury, doing decorative lighting within all the bars. There's like 40 individual bars on the Glastonbury site. Yeah. So they wanted to that was part of their project, was to make sure everything looked really,
what an incredible opportunity.
Absolutely. So it was not a hard question to answer. So I went and did that, and that was the summer of 2008. And I did that for a couple of years, but over that first summer, I just started I went straight into freelancing. So I did Glastonbury, I did Latitude and Leeds and Reading. They became the kind of staples of the summer for me early on. And then slowly, as I was building stuff, I got a chance to get my hands on like the lighting desks and would operate. And I ended up looking after the comedy stage at Latitude for 7 years, and the same with the lockup stage at Leeds, which was originally, it was split between dance music and metal. Yeah. And I'm much more interested in the metal side of things and the punk side of things. And it used to be 2 days to 1 day dance, which I was like, this is great. And then they switched it at one point. I was like, no,
we need the metal.
I know. But then they finally, on my last year that I did do that stage, they split it into 2. So I got a full 3 days of punk and metal. I was in heaven.
That sounds like my idea of heaven as well.
It was wicked. It was wicked. And that was one of my favourite moments, because that stage became it's where I got to light my favourite band of all time once. I'd done them once. They're called Alexis on Fire, and I was so happy. And I was like, I'm in heaven.
I can die a happy woman.
Yeah. Now. I have to say, I think I programmed that whole festival rig based around knowing that they were going to have a show and I was going to be able to do it. So it might have been a little biased on the rest of the bands, I have to admit that one. But it was a great show.
Too good an opportunity to take up, isn't it?
Yeah.
That would have had to have been done.
But it was...
Yeah, that kind of leads into my next question about your experience, and you've obviously got a vast experience from our very short little chat that we're having. As a woman, have you come across any difficulties or barriers within this industry that you've kind of had to deal with, and how have you dealt with that, if you did have any?
Yeah, I think it's, absolutely. We see, I think the group of women that I know who work within like more my specific position as like kind of designers, directors, there is definitely a kind of, you almost have to fight to prove yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
Within any industry, you have to kind of be just as good and be better than your counterparts. There's also like, there's the value of knowing your own worth as well. It seems to be like the kind of financial side of things is one of those things that I think we see as women across the board, regardless of industry, that we're not particularly great at asking for more money when we deserve it, and we deserve the equal pay. But also then there's the choice of being included in certain camps. Like, you're not always going, there's going to be positions that you're going to be better suited to. There's going to be I've definitely found myself in positions where I've been in a camp and I've like, I'm not the right person for this group of people. And I've chosen to walk away. It's a difficult thing to navigate, I think. I've definitely struggled. I've definitely experienced things where I know that I've realised partway through a tour that A, I'm not the right person, and B, I don't think they want me here. Like, I'm
difficult.
Especially if it's like especially when I was younger, it was like if I was the only girl, sometimes I felt that I was maybe interfering with the boys' club sometimes. Like, that was definitely,
you're the outsider looking in.
Yeah. I've been kept separate. I've also not got shows because I'm a girl, or I identify as a woman. You know, I do. I'm aware of that stuff has happened, not because of my abilities at all. But then I've realised in retrospect, looking at that, I'm like, well, if that's the reason why I didn't get it, I probably didn't want to be there anyway. So it's like, if someone's willing to be like, that's their line of where they want to say, okay, we're going to only have this kind of person in our camp. If that's what they want, that's what they want. And I don't really want to be in there. I definitely thrive in a really diverse group of people. I also thrive in like groups where it's been majority men. The first aid kit camp is a really good example of that, because the first aid kit are made up of two Swedish sisters, Joanna and Clara, and they're wonderful. And their band are 3 adoring gentlemen, and the crew are all guys as well, except for me. We do have a merch girl that comes in, but that tour was wonderful. It was a really good group kind of meeting of minds, and it had a real family environment to it, and it was really nurturing, and it was also a really good space for me to grow as an artist in my own right as well. So it was a really thriving environment for me. And that's, you know, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a particularly, like, within the crew side of things it wasn't particularly diverse, but within the whole party it was. But we have, like, within the Elbow Camp, it's a very balanced crew. And I think that's a really valuable asset to have within a group of people. We have within the K Tempest Camp as well, that is a balanced group of people. It has an emphasis on equality and gender equality as well. So there's that K themselves identifies as non-binary. So like that approach, that Kay wants to kind of set up an environment that is welcoming to everybody and is inclusive of everybody. And that's a statement that as well is echoing around more and more artists as well. Like there's definitely an increased demand for female engineers and non-binary engineers, or engineers and designers from the queer community. So that's something that is there are groups of people trying to work towards to encourage that more. And even outside of like the LGBT queer community, it's also within like the kind of racial equality as well. Like we have, you don't have to really look that hard to see that the music industry from a production side of things is quite white, especially in the UK, and in terms of engineering and designing and operating. And there was in 2020 there was a really wonderful project that started up with by an artist called Neo and Muramasa, and their management set up a thing called 3T, which is tour tech training, and they basically got 12. They put an open invite to people, and they wanted 12 people, and they're aiming for 12 women of colour. And so the training course started up, and it went over 12 weeks, and it covered every department within the touring industry. So from tour management, production management, backline tech, lighting, sound, the whole thing. I think the only thing that wasn't covered was catering. I think like every square inch was covered. But over these 12 weekends, these women went and trained to kind of become these techs that were widely versed in the whole industry, so that they could go in to a tour and support a tour as a kind of general tech position. However, each of these women, as you got to know them, all had their own strengths and goals, and out of that training there are touring backline techs, sound engineers, there's and musicians as well. Like there are some of the women are musicians who have given themselves the kind of the skills of understanding what goes on around them when it comes to putting on a show. They're not only performing, they're aware of what's going on around them. So these women are incredible, and it was such a valuable course. And that was in the autumn of 2020. And I think that's one of the most valuable and rewarding things that's like come out of the pandemic, I think, is that course, the establishment of that course, and allowing for spaces to give, to elevate others, to get them in, because our industry is very white. And it was commented on by Ramesh Ranganathan a few years ago when he presented. We have an industry awards ceremony, and he commented on how white the room was, and he was absolutely right. Like it's very, like, on a gender level, it's very, very one-sided. Yep. On a racial level, it's incredibly white. So it's like it needs a little bit more evening out, and the artists, there's definitely a heightened request to find more diverse crew. So yeah,
that's awesome. That was a great answer. I'm like, yes. Thanks so much, Frankie. So you curated several projects as well as doing this in the music industry. Yeah. So would you tell us a little bit about that as well? Yeah.
So when the pandemic hit and everything went to pot, all of my tours were delayed, either postponed or cancelled, and so was left with a bit of space. And it was like that first year was really difficult, and so I ended up through that end of 2020 was doing a lot of kind of studying, trying to figure out where I can still be creative, and where I have value, and also where I get enjoyment. So through that, and I realised that, like, what do I do on my days off? Like, well, wherever I'm on tour, I go to museums and exhibitions. And I absolutely fell in love with a museum in Seattle called the Museum of Pop Culture, which is fantastic. And it's so beautifully done. And when I went, they had They had a guitar exhibition on, but they also had a Jim Henson's Creatures exhibition on, which was fabulous.
Please tell me there were some labyrinth creatures in there.
There was.
Oh my goodness.
It was so good. There was Muppets. There was the lot. It was fantastic. They had Bowie's Dark Crystal outfit as well. Labyrinth outfit. I totally haven't remembered. But they had the Dark Crystal stuff as well. It was beautifully done, but it's an amazing museum. It covers pop culture from top to toe. Then face huggers from Alien, a whole lot. Yeah, all sorts of things.
I need to go. It seems like definitely a bucket list ticker for sure.
And just like its music stuff is just it's so beautifully put together. And I thought about how I felt about that. And when I ended up looking. I was like, I used to live near Goldsmiths University, and I was like. Goldsmiths College, and I thought, maybe that's what I could go and do some part-time courses. So anyway, I looked, and it was the September, and obviously that's well out of like studying normal studying time. I was like, they start courses in January, and there was this course at UAL Central St Martin's called Culture Criticism and Curation, and I thought, why not? So I applied. And I applied for a grant. I got the grant and I was like, well, I've got to get in. But I managed to get in, which was a bit of a shock. But it was like, I managed to kind of turn it all around in a couple of weeks. It was a bit bonkers. And I just had to move house as well. So
no pressure then?
It was
a pandemic as well.
December of 2020 was absolute carnage. But it was brilliant. And I started in January. And so, yeah, I ended up using the course to kind of look at ethics and so my first part of it, I did ethics and ownership of colour. So looking at like Vanta Black, the kind of manufactured pigment where Anish Kapoor has basically said it's all mine. And then Stuart Semple had something to say about that and made his own. So, but then so I looked a lot about that kind of ownership of colour essentially, and then kind of continued the ethics into kind of curatorial activism. And so I ended up working on looking at kind of activism through music, and then decided to kind of move all of that stuff around that kind of musical circle that I've got going on. So how can I make activism and music and exhibitions all work together? Anyway, I ended up getting in touch with some of the organisers of the Rock Against Racism movement in the 70s, and the British Music Experience, who are based up in Liverpool, who were established in 2017 at the O2, and they moved up there. They moved up to Liverpool a few years later. And so I've since developed a relationship with the BME, and I've just finished working on helping them out with the Scottish music exhibition called Don't You Forget About Me. So we've pulled together a bunch of stuff, and I got a few Biffy Clyro bits and some Twin Atlantic bits and pieces, and then we started to put it all together. So that's now open until September, so go
and check that out.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, why not?
So it's a really, really wonderful exhibition, but it's one of those things over the course of the year and doing my research, realised that it's such an important space to have that kind of it's not a museum as such, it is an experience, but it's a kind of way of protecting all of those kind of iconic pieces that may end up going into somebody's cupboard and getting dusty and forgetting about. Like just because pop culture is quite present doesn't mean it's less valuable in a kind of museum setting. And it also doesn't necessarily have to be as stuffy as, a museum can be. So there's that. I feel like it's really, really important that somewhere like the BME exists, and I worry because it's not funded by the Arts Council or anything currently. They're self-funded. They literally rely on ticket sales to keep the place afloat, and they've had a difficult time but they've got such an amazing group of passionate people that work behind the scenes. It was set up, part of the team is Harvey Goldsmith, who does Live Aid and that team. And it's really, really well loved by the people that run it, but it really needs the support of the public. And it's so beautifully put together, and I think it's one of those things that spaces that needs protecting. So they did get a bit of a cash injection from the Cultural Recovery Fund, but it's one of those things I think it just needs to I think it's one of those things that maybe needs a little bit more outward public support. So one of those, that's why I wanted to get involved in it, because I really care about making sure that we protect those kind of cultural artefacts that to some may not be deemed important, but to others are really, really important.
Especially to us in the creative world.
Yeah.
We thrive off things like that, don't we?
Like, there's things like in the Scottish exhibition, there were things that we came across, like there's a zine that I pulled out it was Scotland's only reggae zine from I think it was 1970, I might have this wrong, but it was like 1978 to 1979. Very, very short-lived one, as far as I'm aware, but still very culturally significant, even though it may appear to be quite small. They're just slightly smaller than A5, but that's a really good snapshot of what the reggae scene in Scotland would have been like at the time. And then we've got other things like really beautiful art pieces. So we've got ironically we've got one of Vivi Clairo's jackets for a band that never wear shirts. We've got a coat. It's this I might be saying this wrong. Issey Miyake's Miyake coat, which is like kind of cloud blue with pink all over it. It's crinkly. It's like kind of got a concertina, really geometric concertina down it. It's gorgeous. It's a work of art, and that needs to not be in somebody's cupboard. It needs, like, if Simon Neil can wear it to his heart's content, or like have it on display, because it's just too gorgeous to be gathering to somewhere. And they also kindly gave us some of their notebooks as well, with like the original, like the initial incantations of like many of horror, and pulling apart all of these really beautiful things. Feel like you're reading somebody's diary. It's really like all these treasures. Yeah, and there's old magazines, and also absolutely brilliant to look at the Bay City Rollers stuff. We got given 6 satin style bomber jackets, but were all made for the crew. We never get crew merchandise like that anymore. I'm like, I want a satin bomber jacket. It'll be amazing. But they're they've got the crew names on them. They've got the logo of the tour. It's a whole different world of touring to think about, because when they sold out Japan, they had a big embroidered Japan outline on the back, and just like sold out Bay City Rollers. It's bonkers. And to be fair, it's like it's a piece of art, and it needs to be preserved and showcased to everybody, so that they can take it all in its wonder and glory that it sounds like. That's annoying. I could chat to you for ever. Probably the most important one. So you've worked with Arts Council England previously. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how important it is for institutions like Arts Council England and the Arts Council in the Isle of Man, how important it is to people in the creative world, not just people in the creative industries, but for anybody who's creative, and why these institutions are so important? Yeah, so I applied mainly with the goal of a lot of the tools around lighting design. There's a lot of software that's involved, and we are going through a bit of a software shift at the moment within the from a lighting design, stage design environment, especially with programming lights. and lighting consoles are changing. So it's you almost have to have a little bit of surplus cash in order to be able to invest in like the next step. And obviously when the pandemic hit, although I had savings, I was like, I need to come out of the pandemic still at the same level I was before, but I've got no continued income at all. But I know I want to go back into the music industry. I don't want to abandon it. That's not how I felt at all. I wanted to use the time for growth. So I applied to cover my. So I use a piece of software called WYSIWYG, and that's how I draw shows, and that's also how I program shows. And we use that to. You can take it's a 3D rendering software, so you can program shows in a digital world and then take it to a festival or your actual tour, or you can just practice in there. It's a good practicing space, but it's expensive, and we're talking thousands of pounds a year. So you have to be able to afford this tool that's really, really useful to work in the industry. You have to have surplus cash, and not everyone has that at all. So I applied to basically cover that next year's cost, because you only pay for a license. You have to keep paying every single year. And so I applied for that, and then I also applied for, there's new software that's out, that's also a tool for designing, another 3D software that everyone has been beginning to kind of move into, and get further kind of expand like the design potential. So I wanted to kind of expand my own skills. So I was like, well, I'll put that in there. And then also my general running costs of like having an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription. So I applied for WYSIWYG, this Depence, which is the other rendering software, and Adobe, and I got that. And with that, at the time, the production company that do WYSIWYG, they actually, rather than doing 1 year, they gave me 2 years. So for the Arts Council funding, and with the situation in the pandemic, not only did I get 1 year's coverage, I got 2 years coverage. So there's a little bit of a buy one, get one free there, but it means that like I'm in a such better situation now. I was able to do pre-programming for Elbow without having to do extra costs on renting software for like before I went into the main because the main programming bulk which had been already been paid for, I was able to kind of hone my skills before I put myself in that position where it was time sensitive, and I was able to build like the design for K Tempest. I was able to build designs for other smaller artists and give them high quality designs and concepts that they deserve. And without that, I would be in a situation where I would have to rent stuff, which would cumulatively cost a lot more, because it's not, to design a show takes weeks and it's a really long, slow process. Building it in the software is, depending on the scale of the show, is complicated, and sometimes it can take a day, sometimes it can take a week, and sometimes it can take longer. So by having that tool at my fingertips and at my disposal, I was able to continually build a design and represent myself in a way that is true to my aesthetic and my dedication to the work that the level of work I want to produce. So it's the tools of having like Adobe and Depence and WYSIWYG were, without them I wouldn't have achieved what I have in the last 6 months if I hadn't been able to afford that software. So it's really important, and I'm incredibly grateful, because I know that not everyone is always successful. It's a really difficult situation to be in when people don't get funding and you do. So I think it's important to support each other in whatever way you can, and I feel very grateful that I got that little bit of money that I did when I did.
Bit of security for you to carry on.
Absolutely.
And bit of reassurance that what you're doing you'll be able to do for much longer than you'd originally thought with the pandemic as well.
I felt like it gave me a lot more of like hope in my own future in a way, because it was really like it did. When the music industry fell apart, it felt very hopeless for a little while, for longer than I would have liked it to. So to be able to have like the support and be very lucky to kind of put myself in the positions that I did in the end. It was, it's all luck and hard work.
Yeah. Oh, well, sounds amazing, and so glad that you got the funding for it, and that they were able to help you. Thank you so much for coming to chat to us.
Thank you.
Just the best of luck with your next projects that you're doing as well. And I could chat to you for hours and hours and hours. So we're just coming to the end of our programme now. So hopefully we'll get to catch up with you and chat to you again another time. I'm Ali, and I've been the guest host for Island Artcast.